Hello, everyone. My name is Bob Heck, and I'd like to welcome you to a re-presentation of a presentation I did called Finding Your Ancestors' Trail to Europe. This was done a year ago in May of 2019, and what I'm doing is doing an audio video of it so that you can see it in case you happen to miss this one. But also because we have the coronavirus, and I know that the May 2020 meeting is going to be canceled. I don't believe that there was any way that we could have that meeting take place in this short a time. So, without further ado, what I'd like to do is go through this presentation again. It'll probably take about a half an hour, and should be a lot of good information for you on how to find your ancestors' trail to Europe. Um, this particular picture that you see shown here is actually me standing and pointing to the village where my mother was born in the Moravian area of the Czech Republic, which is right next to Slovakia. We'll talk about that as we go on. So without further ado, let's begin the slideshow. So here is, again, the beginning of the slideshow. We'll go to the next slide. So it might take some time actually to find your roots back to Europe. And there's kind of a funny story. Is one Thursday evening, a lady came into the Family History Center where my cousin Cheryl and I volunteer, and she asked if we could help her find her ancestral home in Europe. And this was on a Thursday evening again. We said that we could, but it might take some time. Well, she said that she needed to know that night because she was leaving for Europe on Saturday morning and wanted to go to her ancestral home. Well, realistically, usually you cannot accomplish that in one night, and we didn't in this case either. So it takes some time to do research, and this program will outline some of the key steps that will help you discover just where your ancestors came from. This particular picture right here shows the Family History Center. There's my cousin Cheryl, and next to her is her dad. Uh, his name happens to be Bob Heck also, and that's me. Uh, her dad, Bob, and I are first cousins. Unfortunately, her father passed away a couple of years ago, and we really miss him, where he used to help us out at the Family History Center. So you think that you have European ancestry. Well, now what do you do? Well, you need to begin your European research by asking some questions and checking local resources. Uh, Family members' tombstones, certificates and documents, family Bibles, church records, newspaper articles, obituaries, photographs, a very important area, letters, and diaries. And we will go through each of these areas and show you what you might find and how to find it. So starting out with family members, you really need to interview the oldest relative first for obvious reasons. Um, and there are a couple of key questions. Where did our family come from? What part of Europe were they from? How did they get here? When did they get here? Why did they leave Europe? And where did they live in the United States? Did they start out right straight, from Europe to Wisconsin, or did they live for a couple of years in New York and maybe in Vermont, Connecticut, before they migrated to Wisconsin? So that's important information, and you need to know that. When you interview that person, we recommend that you use a digital voice recorder. It's a very small little device, um, and not very expensive. And you'll get a good recording of all the information that you obtained during the interview. You need to ask questions that cannot be answered with a simple yes or no. You need to let the person being interviewed elaborate a bit. Tombstones might give you a clue, but they are often considered by genealogists to be the most inaccurate source. Here are two tombstones. These are both of my relatives. One is Johann Schaefer Geb in Ellendorf. The Geb is an abbreviation for German geboren, which means born in Ellendorf. The other one is Susanna Sohns, geboren in Ellendorf, Rhine province. Notice the difference in the spelling of the two Ellendorfs, yet they're the same town. So what you find on a tombstone might give you a hint, but it's not necessarily accurate. So let's take a little closer look here. Here's Susanna Zones, and it says she was geboren Schaefer, which means her maiden name was Schaefer. She was born as a Schaefer. And she was born in Ellendorf, and again they have that unusual spelling, Hahlendorf. That is not the correct spelling for that town, but it's on a tombstone. Some people might say, well, it has to be accurate because it's carved in stone. Well, realistically, it's not. So this was also a search I did on Find a Grave, which is a free site, and lo and behold, I found John Peter Schaefer, who was actually Johann Peter Schaefer, and he was originally from Ellendorf, Germany. He immigrated at the age of 26, arrived in New York September 3rd, 1852. That's some key information there, by the way. He was on board the ship the Antarctic, and it departed from Antwerp, Belgium. The Schaefer passengers included his parents, Johann Sr., 56, Maria, 46, and his brothers and sisters, including Susanna, who's the one who became Zoan. Also, this stated that John Peter, his siblings and parents, were part of a large group of settlers in family units who arrived in Swan Lake, Nicollet County, Minnesota in 1857 from Kenosha County, Wisconsin, where they had settled when they arrived from Germany. So that's some significant information. Not sure who posted that information, but it was there, and it turned out to be quite accurate. Certificates and documents are an excellent source, particularly naturalization records, marriage certificates, death certificates, passenger lists, and military records, particularly draft records, but more importantly, pension records. Those usually give some very good information. This image that I'm showing right here is the Faulkner family and Frederick Faulkner. And it was a young lady that came into the Family History Center looking for information. And I believe this is her great-grandfather. And that evening we were able to find this document, which zeroed in and told us where he was from. He was from, according to this document, his birthplace was listed as Kallerschlag right here, Germany, but actually it's in Austria. And you say, well, wait a minute, what's going on there? Is there a Kallerschlag Germany and a Kallerschlag Austria? Well, this particular picture happens to be Kallerschlag. That's the church. So why Germany rather than Austria? The date on the document was August 1st, 1939, and on March 12th, 1938, German troops marched into Austria. I think they called that the Auschwitz, and they annexed the German-speaking nation for the Third Reich. So when this document was filled out in 1939, technically Austria was part of Germany. That's where it came from. Family Bibles and church records are excellent sources also. Uh, if you're fortunate enough to have a family Bible, uh, it's usually a good source for birth records, marriage records, and deaths. And they often contain the place of the event. What you have to be careful of in a Bible is when you take a look, was it all written by the same person using the same pen, or was it entered as the events occurred? There's a difference. If it was all entered later, the further away it is from the actual event, the less accurate it can be. So church records in this country might contain a place of origin or birthplace of the parents in Europe. Many of the churches would uh, conduct what they would refer to as a church census, which was basically a list of the families that were part of that church or parish. And this applies to any of the religions. And usually the names were all grouped in a family group. So, for example, the Heck family would be grouped together, and it may give where the person was born, may give more information. It might even tell you when they immigrated. Here's an example. This happens to be the christening record for my grandmother, and you can see here it's Margaret, and this is Frederica. That was her middle name, and here's her last name, Henningfeld. Well, Henningfeld's not spelled the way the family spelled it, but it's the way the priest did. He spelled it that way. Um, the Margaret and the Frederica are both written in Latin terms, and if if a priest happened to end up maybe in the bottom of his Latin class, they typically just put an AM at the end of the word and made it Latin. Um, so this particular document is from 1880 in Burlington, Wisconsin, and it shows that the father of Margaret was Henry Henningfeld from Waterford. So he came from Waterford. And the mother was Clara, born or known as, or Nada, it's called, Stratman. So Stratman is her maiden name. And she was ex-local Ham, comma, Prussia. And this is the way the priest would write Prussia. So what's interesting is we looked at this record for many, many times, and this was interpreted as being an abbreviation because of that mark there, an abbreviation for Hamburg. Let's look at that a little more. So again, we looked at the record many times, and we assumed that the Ham was an abbreviation for Hamburg, which is a very large city in northern Germany. Chances of finding the family in that very large city is much more challenging and difficult. So finally, we went back and we started looking at the christening records for my grandmother's siblings. We thought, well, maybe there's some more there. But there was a surprise. One showed Hamm, Hamm, which is a small city in central Germany. And here's that record. This is my grandmother's sister, Dorothea Amelia Henningfeld. And this particular record was filled out on the 25th of July, and it shows her father was Henry Henningfeld from Waterford, and her mother was Clara, born Stratman, from Ham, Hamm, in Eastphalia, Ostphalia it's called. So we knew where it was then. So the next step was to go and order. At the time we ordered the microfilm. That record is now online. And excuse me. Here you see Clara Sibylla Stratman. So this is my great grandmother, and it gives her birth date. She was born at 3 o'clock in the morning. That's unusual. Her father's name was Anton Stratman, and her mother was Elizabeth Guthoff. So I'm finding some good information there. So because of this one record, we were able to expand our family ancestors and descendants by several hundred people. I think the number was over 300. Here's a pedigree chart that we put together. And this shows my great grandmother. Excuse me. Clara Sibylla Stratman. And these are all the people that we found as a result of that one record. So here's my great grandmother, great greats, great great great, great 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 great, and on and on and on. The family Bible might list the place of birth. I mean, look over in this area right in here. You can see the location of the birth. So it gives an event, usually a date and a place. This can be very, very valuable. Unfortunately, not many people own one of these Bibles or a Bible from your family's earlier time period. Newspaper articles and obituaries are also excellent sources. They can have errors in them, but that's all right. It gives you a hint, particularly marriages, anniversary. Most people never look at anniversaries, yet that may be the document you need. So be sure to look 25 years after a marriage and look at 50 years after a marriage. Those anniversaries are key. There are also ethnic organizations that they might have belonged to, and sometimes you can find records of them, which will give you a hint or maybe actually list the place of birth. When you look for obituaries, check all the local newspapers, but also check the ethnic newspapers. Excuse me. In the case of my grandparents, the Mikhail and Pastudicek family, they were from the Czech Republic, actually Czechoslovakia was when they came over. And I remember them having a Czech newspaper. I remember it sitting on the treadle sewing machine. That newspaper would be there. It was written in Czech, and it was usually much more detailed, and it was about local events occurring within the city of Racine. So let's take a little closer look at this one. It's an obituary for Wilhelmina Cruz. She was born on the 19th of January, 1848, at Neuklrchen, Neuklrchen, Mecklenburg-Schwerin, Germany. And she came to America in 1868. And here's her marriage date. She was married to Fred Lehman in Chicago. So that's a significant amount of information out of one obituary. The photographs, letters, and diaries are also some really good sources. This happens to be a photograph made in Germany. And when people copy these photographs, they tend to copy just the image of the person or the persons. And what they're missing is this little bit of information at the bottom. So what I recommend is you copy the entire photograph, and you can do that by scanning or digital camera. Also do the back of the card or the photograph. Very often you'll find something there. In this particular case, this shows that this photograph was made in Marburg, and not quite sure where Marburg was. And there was this handwritten note right here, and initially I interpreted that as Henny, I had no idea what that was. Um, Maybe it was trying to identify the people, but I didn't know. Well, it turned out that, and we'll take a little closer look at that, of what that actually is. We'll do that in a second. Over here, here's an envelope, and it shows that it was from Dresden, and up here is a postmark, and you can read those postmarks. Down here is a postcard, and it also has a postmark. So let's take a closer look at some of these. In the case of the card, it says that this particular card came from Ravensburg, and down here it tells which area of Germany. It was Württemberg, which is a state of Germany. So this is pretty good information here. Now again, where's Marburg? I looked it up on the internet, and it's a university town in the German federal state, or the Bundesland, of Hesse. So that's what that actually is Hesse. It's Hesse. So somebody wrote that down on the back of the photo. Probably someone trying to figure out, well, where's Marburg? And someone told them in Hesse, and so they wrote it down. Here's a photo of a church that was in an album from my grandmother, and she was married at that church in 1907. I love that little car here right in the beginning. It'd be neat to have that. So this is the church, and I needed to find out exactly where it was. Well, there's a good way to do that. So we've got a picture of the church, but we didn't know exactly where it was located. So one way is to find the location by use of Google Images. If you go into Google and you take a look at images, they have a camera icon, and this allows you to upload the image of the church. Google will then search and see if it can locate the same church and try to match that photo. So Google will provide the information about the location if it finds it. In this case, here's what that icon looks like. And you can see I'm in Google Images. And here's the icon. Click on the camera, and that allows you to upload the picture. Google came back with this picture right here, and another one. I'll show you. Here are the two pictures. Here's the original that was in my grandmother's photo album, and here's one that was taken in 2017 at the village of Uherský Brod in the Moravian area of the Czech Republic. And you can see by the structure here and the statues on top, it's the same church. So that's a good way to find the location. This is another way, this was a 1944 letter from my great-grandmother, and it shows on the postmark Uherský, and you can't get all of it on there. The Y is gone. Well, there was obviously a stamp here, and I think my aunt probably kept the stamp, and it's unfortunate because it would have shown Uherský and some more information on where it's at. It's Uherský Brod. So this particular picture is from my great-grandmother. That's her holding my mother shortly before my mother and her parents immigrated to the United States in 1914. So go back, take another look in that old shoebox that you got sitting in the closet, and start by looking at what you already have. So there are probably a lot of clues in there that could ultimately lead you to the ancestral home in Europe. Here I'm blowing this picture up a little bit. Again, that's my mother right there with her grandmother, or my great-grandmother. And again, I'm looking at the information down at the bottom of the picture, and you can see Here's the name of the photographer, and here is the town, Owerski Broad. If it doesn't give the town, but you get the name of a photographer and you got a rough idea when the photograph was made, you can go into Google and do a search for the photographer. Put that name down with a space and then the word photographer. And if you know it was from the Czech Republic, for example, you could put down CZ for Czechoslovakia. So that will work. Okay. Here's again a picture. This was the same as the one on the front of me pointing to the village of Owerski Broad in 2017. My wife and I went there on our 50th wedding anniversary. Right there is the church that we saw earlier. That's where my mother was christened. So look at your family photo albums. Many of the families had photos made in Europe prior to coming to America. Look for the photographer's imprint. Look on front and back, and it might give you the name of the town. Families still kept in touch with their families and friends from their home village or town. So look for letters and photographs. Many settled in the same neighborhood in America, and they socialized together. This is an example. Here's a photograph. These were all friends from Racine, Wisconsin. They all came from Owerski Broad, the Czech Republic. And this is my grandfather, John Mikel. And the people who came over were this lady right here, this lady, this gentleman, this lady, this gentleman, and my grandfather. They were all on the ship together. This one over here is Mr. Polonsky. He's the one that ran the meat market in Racine. So check the U.S. Census to find the year of arrival, whether they were naturalized, when they were naturalized, the place of birth, the parents' place of birth, and their native tongue. That's all key information. Each one of the censuses are different. For the 1940 through 1910 period, here's the information that's contained. And again, immigration year, naturalized, things like that. There's some key information there. In the earlier census, the information was a little sketchier. 1900 was okay, but 1880 and when you go back beyond 1870 through 1850, there's very little information on the census. But when you look at the naturalization in the census, there are 3 different markings that you will find. A lot of people don't know that. They don't know what it means. These are the 3, AL, PA, and NA. AL meant alien, and it meant that they did not apply for citizenship. PA meant that they applied for the first papers, which we call the Declaration of Intent. NA means they obtained their final naturalization. But you need to be aware that some people thought that if they applied for those first papers, that they automatically became a citizen. And in the later census, when asked, "Are you a citizen?" they would say, "Oh yeah," and the census taker would write down NA, that they obtained their final naturalization. In reality, they may have only obtained the first papers and issued the Declaration of Intent. So this is a very little known fact that American women who are born in the United States, are U.S. citizens, between 1907 and 1922, they could have lost their citizenship. If they married an alien, they would lose their citizenship during that time period. So this was done by an act March 2nd, 1907, which was known as the Expatriation Act. And it really made a mess of things. Congress mandated that any American woman who marries a foreigner, and in this case they're meaning a non-citizen, shall take the nationality of her husband Upon marriage, regardless of where the couple resided, the woman lost her American citizenship and she was morphed into the husband's citizenship. So finally, Congress finally got it right about 24 years later. That's pretty high speed for Congress. It's called the Cable Act, which is also known as the Married Women's Independent Nationality Act, or the Married Women's Act. This was passed on September 22nd, 1922. And what it did is it repealed the 1907 Expatriation Act. So there were a series of bills introduced in 1931 which removed some of the remaining inequities of the 1922 Act. The ineligible spouse clause and the foreign resident issues were addressed. The citizenship process, I think most people are aware of this. The first thing they did was to issue a declaration of intent to become a citizen. We often call that the first papers. Next was a petition for naturalization, and that contained quite a bit of information, and they were referred to as the second papers. The third item was a certificate of citizenship, and generally it did not contain much information, and they were referred to as the final papers. Here's the Declaration of Intent of Albert Einstein, or the first papers. And this area over here gives a lot of information about where he was born, when he married. All that information is here, and it included a picture of him and his signature. The petition for naturalization, these are the second papers. They can contain quite a bit of information, particularly in the later papers, in later years. This one here happens to be for my grandmother, and in that, up in this area here, it lists that she was born in the village of Rudimov. She was married in the village of Ursky Brod. She lists all of her children and where they were born and their date of birth. Two of them were born in Ursky Brod. So that's some significant information if you can find that. Over here, this is it's called a certificate of arrival. When a person applied for citizenship, the federal government contacted the port, say for example Ellis Island, and requested proof that the person arrived when they said they arrived. And that's what this does. It gives the name of the ship, in this case the SS George Washington. It gives the date of arrival, and that's June 8th, 1914. So that's the date that the ship arrived in New York at Ellis Island. So that's some significant information. The certificate of citizenship, or the final papers, is nice to have. Here's a picture of my grandmother and her signature. But it doesn't give a lot of genealogical information. It says she was born in Czechoslovakia, and she was married there too. So, but it doesn't tell you where. So armed with the naturalization papers, you have a place of birth and a date of arrival, a place of arrival, and the name of the ship. Earlier records might list the place of birth as Prussia, Austria, Hungary, or Germany. So we still have to do more research to find an actual place of birth. So many people are confused, however. The Czechs, the Slovaks, Ukrainians, the Slovens and Romanians and others may show up in some records as being from Austria or Hungary or both. How can that be? My grandmother always said that they were from Czechoslovakia. Well, there's this thing called the Austro-Hungary Empire, which was formed in 1867. The Austro-Hungary Empire was a multinational state. It was one of the world's great powers at the time. Austria-Hungary was geographically the second largest country in Europe. It was dissolved in 1918 at the end of World War I. This colored area all the way around here shows the Austro-Hungary Empire. And this was what it looked like in 1910. And you can see here's Moravia, part of the Czech Republic. Here's Bohemia. That's where Prague is located. It was all part of the Austro-Hungary Empire. Oftentimes we would have somebody come into the Family History Center, and we would ask, where's your family from? And they would say, Austria, or they would say Hungary, or Austria or Hungary. And we would tell them the story that it could be any one of these countries rather than just Austria or Hungary. So it was part of the empire. So the Austro-Hungary Empire included Germans, Austrians, Hungarians, Czechs, Slovaks, Poles, Ukrainians, the Slovens, Croats, and Serbs, Romanians, and surprisingly, Italians. But just a small section of Italy was part of that empire. So where to next? Well, you look at the passenger lists. That's worth looking at, but the information that you'll glean from that is usually somewhat minimal. If you're lucky, it may list more pertinent information depending on the time period, and we'll look at that. Also, Germans and Russians and Italians to America. It's an excellent series, and I'll show you about that. Ancestry has the Germans, or what we call the To America series. They're available on Ancestry and on Family Search, and I'll show you how to get to it. Here's the earlier passenger list, and in this case, what it does, there's a section, where did you come from? And the question might simply show Germany. In this case, here's Germany. And it shows your destination, USA. That's not a lot of help. In the case of Germany, oftentimes you may find Prussia. So Germany or Prussia. The later passenger lists were quite valuable. This happens to be one in 1912. And over here it shows, here's my grandfather, John, Jan, Michael, or Mikael, we pronounced it. And these are the people that were on that photograph I showed you earlier. And there's some pertinent information here. And we're going to look at this section right in here, and I'll blow that up. Oftentimes, this time period of passenger lists was 2 pages long, so you need to look at both pages. Here, this shows that they were coming from Uherské Brod. This is my grandfather's line. And what it does is it shows a relative or friend from the place where the person left. And here it shows at this address right here, Uherské Brod 646, his wife, Anna Mikalova. That's the females add OVA to the end of their surname. So it's Mikalova. And they're from Uherské Brod. Their destination was Wisconsin and the city of Racine. Here is my great-grandmother in 1868, and here it shows where she was from. When somebody indexed this document, they indexed it as being from Hamburg. They assumed that that was Hamburg, not the city of Ham. Turned out it should be Ham, H-A-M-M. By 1914, the passenger lists also showed the person with whom they will be staying and the relationship to that person. Sometimes it was a friend, but oftentimes it was a relative, a brother, a brother-in-law, a sister, sister-in-law. It'll give the address of that person in the United States, and it shows the name and address of the relative or friend from the place that they left from. And again, often that person is a parent or a spouse. The To America series is available again at FamilySearch.org, also on Ancestry, and there are several other places that, or sites rather, that have the America series. So what you need to do is click on Search, and then scroll down and click on Browse All Published Collections. Select the United States of America, and there will be a number there. That number is the number of databases in the collection. At the time I did this, there were 1,067. That number is higher today. Select the United States. In this case, they showed 118. It is more than that now. And again, what I was looking at here is a list of the states, and 6 positions above Wisconsin was the United States. And I wondered, well, why is the United States listed there? And it turns out that there are 118 databases in the United States that pertain to more than one state. That's why it's there. So scroll down to the United States of America, to the index, to Germans to America, and the index, and it covers the period from 1850 to 1897. There are over 4 million names there. The Russians to America, there's over 500,000 there. The Italians to America, there's 845,000 names there. One of them could be your ancestor. In the case of Russia, sometimes people that came from areas that were occupied by Russia are listed in that area. So even if your family's from Poland, part of Poland was dominated by Russia, they could be in that collection. So be sure to check. So did your family come from the Eiffel Mountain area, Germany? If so, you're really in luck. The original study area of what's called the Eiffel Mountain area was bounded by the border with Luxembourg and Belgium, and that was on the west. Blankenheim and Arnberg on the north. Muhlenberg and Eisenschmidt on the east, and the Westbillig to the south. And the Moselle River is the eastern boundary of the Eifel region in Germany. So this is what it looks like. You can see right here it says Eifel, right here, Eifel. And here shows the area that's outlined for this Eifel region database. Every one of those blue dots represents a town or village, and those records are online. It's called the Tom Pick's website. I have to tell you a little about that. Tom Pick was a genealogical researcher, and it's a young man. He has since died from a stroke, but he went into the microfilms of each one of those villages and towns and read the birth, christening, and marriage records and recorded it into a database. And then he put it online and made it available for free. And then it was actually at a different site than this one is showing right here. But after he passed away, his family decided that that database was so significant that they created a database, and here it is right here on RootsWeb, and you can go there today. So again, it's dedicated to all those people who are researching families that came from that Eifel region of Germany, and that was as of 2008. there were 557,000 names in 680 towns and villages. It's really a gold mine. If your family came from there, and a lot did, a lot of families came from there and settled in Wisconsin. So again, it contains birth and marriage information. So if you go into his site, you can take a look, and the towns and villages are listed alphabetically. Here's Ellendorf, where my Heck family came from. If you click that, you'll go actually to the database. And here's my Heck family database. Here are all the Hecks up here, and down here are the Heckens. The Heck name actually began as Hecken, and the EN was dropped after a while, and then the name was shown as Heck. So here is each of the names. Here's the father's surname and his given name. Here's the mother's maiden name, her given name, and then over here are the children. And each one of these dates represents the date of christening of these children. This date right here represents the marriage date of that couple over here. And it shows they're from Ellendorf. It's a significant database. Polish towns often had German names, particularly when they were occupied. There is a website called the Kartenmeister, and here's the address for that. And you can go to this site to find the German or the Polish town name. The problem is that the two names, the Polish name and the German name, may be very much different, or they could be close. And in some cases, when the Germans renamed the village, and that name was retained after the Germans left Poland, and the Polish kept that name. So you will find that. So if you go here, you can enter a German or a Polish town name. And this is particularly true if you go in and you think you have the town name and you look on Google Maps and you can't find it. It might be that it's under the German name. So what you do is you can enter, if you think it's the German name, enter it here. Or if you think it's the Polish name, enter it here. And click on Submit. And this is what will happen. It'll show both variations there. Here's the Polish name and here's the German name. So here, I can't even pronounce this, but this particular town in Poland was listed as Putzernen in Germany as the German name. But this gives you the location. If you click on Google Maps, it will send you to that town. So this is a significant helping aid. I encourage new researchers to document their findings. I encourage them to start a research log using a bound booklet such as a composition book. It's a good place to keep your notes. Don't do it this way. This we often call the horizontal file system. And it's just a pile of papers, and I challenge anyone to be able to find anything in that. It's a good idea to construct what we call a timeline chart, and there are many pieces of software that will do that for you. Many of the genealogy programs will do it. So here's a timeline, and what it does is it shows when a particular person was born and died, or probably died. And it gives you a feeling or a sense of who you're looking for. The males are shown in blue, the female in red, the children are in green. So let's take a look at the next one. This happens to be created by Legacy Program, and it does kind of the same thing, except it's not in color. but it gives you a time frame. Here you can see time starting, in this case, 1790, I think it is, and 2040. Well, 2040, wow, we're not there yet. So this shows all these names that are in the database and where they fit. I use a very simple timeline chart, and I call it a fact sheet. What I do is I enter all the events of on an individual by date in chronological order. What this does is it helps in putting the facts in order. It also helps in planning your research. And as new items are uncovered, you can easily just add them in the proper order. This is my great-great-grandfather, Peter McNulty's fact sheet. It's not the entire sheet because his sheet begins in 1807 and it runs through 1861. So I'm just showing here from 1840 to 1861. And here in 1840, on the 10th of December, Peter McNulty purchased land from the federal government in Kenosha County, Wisconsin. So this establishes where he was in 1840. He came in through St. John's, Newfoundland, or I'm sorry, not Newfoundland, St. John's, New Brunswick, and then from there went to Boston, and from there apparently went to New York State, possibly Connecticut, and then from there to Wisconsin. So by 1840, we've got him in Wisconsin. In 1842, there was a Wisconsin census, and he was living at Pleasant Prairie, which is in Racine County, Wisconsin. So, and this goes on, and it gives you the history basically. And it's a great way to keep your research straight. Also, you should construct a pedigree chart showing family connections. At the Family History Center, when we have somebody come in and they're not really well organized, we'll start putting them on a pedigree chart. We'll put the person here, their parents, their grandparents, their great-grandparents. And this is significant because it acts like a roadmap. And it kind of helps so that as you're researching with a person, it kind of shows who you're talking about. Okay, we're in this line right now, not in this line down here. So it can be a significant help in keeping your mind straight and on track. So if you need help, you can come to the Family History Center at 9600 West Grange Avenue. Right now it's closed because of the corona virus. These are the hours, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 8:30 in the morning until 3:30 in the afternoon, and 6:30 in the evening till 9 in the evening. My cousin Cheryl and I are there on Thursday evening, 6:30 till 9. Saturday they're open from 10 a.m. till 1. So again, Cheryl and I are always willing and ready to help people with their research. Come on in Thursday evenings, 6:30 till 9. And that concludes this presentation. We hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something from it. And if you have any questions, you're a member of MPAFUG, you have my email address and you can contact me. Again, thank you and happy hunting.